sense where the ordinary user, how do they think about cloud? What does cloud mean to them? To them, cloud means, Google Apps, Gmail, things like that. They've got things up on somebody else's computer. On the other hand, we have what you guys do, and sort of the infrastructure as a service layer, which are really increasingly becoming the bones of the internet, the thing that we build upon. And I think one of the most dangerous things that we see happening in this space, and one of the things that you guys do best, is help the people who are placed to actually make the decisions about how to build, right? Make these in a considered way. For most people, the internet is kind of magic. It just happens. They look at it on their smartphone. Their Facebook app is the internet, right? But that's not enough. And we can't actually let people go to this mindlessly, effortlessly, when they're in the act of building rather than consuming. And it raises the question of why, right? Particularly when there are these sort of primarily for-profit alternatives when we get to the infrastructure as a service layer. You could use EC2, you could use Google's compute engine or whatever. And these are fine, right? They work. But the problem here is that they're fundamentally disempowering. You give them money, right? And in exchange, you're supposed to be provided with a service. And that exists, right? But you're actually providing them more than money. You're also providing them your data, and you're giving up control. You're giving up influence. You can't reshape their infrastructure. They're not going to change things and tailor it for your needs. And you end up reaching a certain point where, okay, these are portable to a certain extent. You can containerize things and ship them around. But you're sinking costs into an infrastructure that is not yours, fundamentally. What OpenStack does, right, it makes you lose that fundamental, inherent, silent vulnerability of investing into things that you do not influence, that you do not own, that you do not control, that you do not even shape. Whereas with OpenStack, you build it layer by layer. It requires a little bit more of a technical understanding. But as it's becoming more sophisticated, and as it continues to comply with this very free and open set of values that the open source community in general drives all over the place, but particularly here, we can start to envision a world where cloud infrastructures, right, are not private in the sense of private corporations, but private in the sense of personal, right? Whether you are a small business, whether you are a large business, whether you are a community of technologists, you can own it, you can control it, you can shape it, right? You can build, you can lay the foundation upon which everybody builds. And I think that's probably one of the most powerful ideas that shapes the history of the internet, and hopefully will allow us to direct the future of the internet in a more free rather than more closed way. So probably my most famous involvement has been during the NSA revelations of 2013. Which people don't really think about too much in depth because, the NSA is primarily running on a Windows infrastructure, right? They have Linux machines, they've got servers and things like that to do that. For the NSA and the CIA, we've seen quite recently through like the Vault 7 leaks and the Shadow Brokers leaks, that there are also very aggressive GPL violators in the intelligence community. But on the
we have a lot of licensing geeks
sort of
here that are
side,
interested to hear that.
There's this journalistic side, right? How did we actually make this happen? How did we effectuate the return of public information to public hands that revealed sort of unlawful activity, unconstitutional activity, the violation of rights or norms or laws? And this was almost entirely powered by open source, right? The Tor guards that I was going through, I stood up myself. They were running on Debian. We're using all the journalists. We're using Tails, the Tails project as their interfaces because I wanted to limit the amount of mistakes they could make. They were learning on the fly. Nobody had seen this, and of course they weren't specialists in this. And the Tor project, was really the most critical piece for helping people. It's not to say it'll secure everyone from everything forever, but it gave them enough breathing room to make things happen. Now, since then, I was elected by the board as a director at Freedom of the Press Foundation. Now I have become the president of the Freedom of the Press Foundation. And my primary work there since joining has actually been expanding the open source development efforts that we have in-house there. Of course, we make Secure Drop, which is run at all the major important newsrooms in the United States and increasingly around the world now, for allowing sort of anonymous sources to contact journalists securely. But there are a lot of other really interesting efforts that you'll be hearing about more this year. One of them, for people that are interested in sort of open hardware space, is last year I gave a talk with Andrew Bunny Huang at the MIT's Forbidden Research Conference on what we call an introspection engine for modern smartphone. We're targeting the iPhone 6 here. And this gets into that central issue that we sort of talked again about with infrastructure, is you're running things on, Google's stack. You're running things on Amazon's stack. How do you know when it starts spying on you? How do you know when your image has been passed to some adversarial group, right? Whether it's just taken by an employee and sold to a competitor, whether it's taken, copied for the FBI, whether legally or illegally, right? You really don't have any awareness of this. Because it's happening at a layer that's hidden from you. It doesn't matter whether it's a rootkit, doesn't matter whether it's a hypervisor, doesn't matter whether it's just a process stack. The same thing happens with our phones, right? When we turn on airplane mode, when we turn off location services, how do we know the GPS is actually off? How do we know the baseband antenna is actually powered down? We're trusting a software attestation, and a rootkit can make that lie to you. So we are developing a hardware which is free and open. Anybody will be able to replicate this. We're going to provide the plans. We've already written the paper about it, where you will be able to actually look at the electron flow over these circuit paths to confirm that for yourself. Think beyond what the license says is clearly lesson number one from this year. That stuff matters. The capability matters. And we have to recognize that, all government involvement isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? All intelligence agencies aren't necessarily bad either. There's a lot of good people at NSA. There's a lot of good people even at CIA. It's hard to say it, but there's even some good people at the FBI. And the idea here is we want to enable everybody, right? But we want to think about the context and meaning of our work as technologists. Fundamentally, we don't work for governments, we don't work for states, we don't work for corporations. We should be working for the spirit of technology itself, moving people closer to a more empowered future. I try to think of this in terms of values, right? All systems should largely be designed to obey the user. And secondly, they should not be designed to hide things from the user. They should not deceive the user. They should not lie to the user. And they shouldn't hide things material from the user. This is one of the largest problems that we have with closed source. It's not so much that somebody doesn't want to share source code, although that matters in the abstract sense. It's what that actually means when they don't. That leads to the world that we have today, where we've got vulnerabilities in every Intel chip. That has AMT enabled and things like this, because Intel's monitoring engine, Intel's management engine has these blobs on it that we can't inspect, that we can't see, that we can't change, that we can't patch ourselves. When you're thinking about your ethical obligations, the main thing is, how do I empower the user? And if this creates a large-scale disruption in traditional power structures, right? If this can be used, or an amplification of powers that are used by sort of aggressive actors, whether they're corporate, whether they're government entities or anything else. How can people be sheltered against this, right? At least enter that chain of thought and think about what you can do to protect people. You know, the traditional world we like to think about of, you know, the happy policeman on the street that's looking out for people is increasingly, and some would say tragically, being displaced by technology. Because we can only put so many people in so many places, but technology is everywhere. And if we are going to have a computer in every home, in every pocket, in every car, in every place, we need to make sure that they are living by the values that protect and serve the public. This is a complicated space, and it's hard to get in here in the short time that we have, because we could spend an hour just on this topic. But to look at it briefly, mitigations work. We know that. If you can start to move entire bug classes off the table, start using memory-safe languages and things like that for development, sort of best practices for coding standards, for design standards, to limit the kind of weaknesses that you have, that you're validating inputs and things like that. This will make attacks much more expensive, but there's still going to be that market out there. There's still going to be people that are looking for that, and they're still going to succeed. Now, traditionally, we've said the beauty of open source is that, you know, many eyes make all bugs shallow, but we see the bugs still get through. And they still get through for a very long time, even in the most open context. We get things like shell shock, right? And the impacts of this are large. But that's not actually an argument that we shouldn't do open source, is that some bugs get through. The beauty of it is that when something like that does come through, just as we get all of these bugs all the time in these closed source ecosystems, you know, even iOS has jailbreaks and things like that fairly routinely. And they have actually a quite skilled security team. The entire community can respond, and they do, right? When a shell shock type bug is discovered, everybody looks at that code base, right? And it gets improved in more ways than just that. It gets more people involved in the process. We don't want to encourage or look for these big bugs to hit us, right? And then be like, oh, great, we had a wonderful response afterwards. But the fact that we can is fundamentally empowering, and it's fundamentally educational. We learn from it, we improve as a community. When Apple has a security flaw, when Google has a security flaw, when Amazon's stack, you know, or even not in their fundamental programming thing, but just in their processes, their employees are clicking on phishing emails, their keys are stored on a staging server, and somebody can get in and pop that and laterally, and now they've got the keys to the kingdom. We don't know what they learned. We can't evaluate if their response was positive or negative, if it was good enough or not good enough. And ultimately, even if we don't like it, we have no influence over it. Now, people might go boo-hoo. That's sort of how private industry works. And that's a fair argument, right? But the point of open source is that we have a better one. We don't have to compromise. We want a better world, and so we're here to build it. Depends on the day. I am fundamentally optimistic. When you look at where we are in the progress of technology, we are at a crossroads. We have been struck by a moral dilemma that we did not ask for, that we did not seek. The way I've described this before is, this is the atomic moment for the profession of computer scientists, right? In the last century, we had nuclear physicists who were looking at the science. They were trying to master the fundamental laws of the universe, just how this stuff fits together, and they wanted to see how far they could go. They discovered some new means of productivity, right? This incredible energetic potential. That's what the internet is today. The problem is we did not predict how bad actors, aggressive, violent actors, would apply these discoveries of ours. Now we need to think about how we can mitigate them. We can't put the genie back in the bottle, right? We can't unsplit the atom. But what we can do is make sure that we don't make the same errors that we made in the last century, where just to make sure something's working, just to make sure that our cell phone network works, we adopt terrible standards like sort of this SS7 sort of circuit switching system for cell phones, where it can be hijacked from all over the world, where we have the weakest possible encryption schemes that could possibly be applied to typical cell phone communications, because governments actually encouraged the adoption of that. They wanted them to be weak enough to break. They didn't say that was why, but we need to make sure that we're not looking at good enough, particularly not good enough for now, because it's very hard to update the technology. It's very hard to move legacy stuff out of production. We all know that, everybody sitting in the room. We need to start thinking about how to build not just for today, but for the next 100 years by setting an example and by setting protocols that say, we're going to build things not for today, we're going to build things for beyond tomorrow. This is extremely complex. When you look at the political dynamics today, whether it's the election in the United States, the closeness of the election in France, laws that we see being passed in the United Kingdom. They passed the most extreme surveillance bill in the history of Western democracy last year, called the Investigatory Powers Bill. In places like Russia, we see laws like the Yarovaya Paket, it's called here. Russians call it simply the Big Brother law. And when Russians are calling a surveillance law the Big Brother law, you know there's a problem. Fear has become the most common political value in the world. Saying, but terrorism will defang any opposition, it will silence any counter-proposals, and this puts us in a systemically vulnerable place where the traditional systems of checks and balances upon which Western civilization has relied upon, particularly since the democratic process sort of spread around the world, are starting to fail. Courts are afraid to rule in areas that are politically controversial, even though they are legally quite clear. For example, all this mass surveillance in the United States is a pretty clear violation of the Fourth Amendment. Any sort of expert group like the ACLU looks at this, is filing cases about it, and the courts are very hesitant. They work these things through the appeals process about on a 10-year span because they don't want to be seen as simply applying the law in the way that makes sense and the way that would restrict the government in the way that it traditionally has, because judges are people too, right? Judges are vulnerable to fear in the same way everybody else is. Politicians are vulnerable to fear in the same way everybody else is. Presidents are vulnerable to fear in the same way. And this creates a world in which the weakest link in the fabric of the safeguards of our rights is increasingly becoming human. Now, this leaves us in a place where the traditional mechanisms of enforcing human rights are beginning to fail. So we have to develop new ones. The beautiful thing is, at the same time these old processes are beginning to fail, technology, we're seeing glimpses where it can enforce human rights in new ways beyond borders, right? Let's say you have a country that doesn't respect human rights as well as the global standard, right? This doesn't have to be a place like South Sudan or Cameroon or Russia or China. This can be a place like the United Kingdom. This can be a place like France. This can be a place like right here in the United States, in Boston. But if we develop protocols, systems that are invisibly surrounding us every day, they're in our pockets, right? Even if somebody doesn't touch the internet personally, their communications are transiting the internet. They're relying upon this fabric that we built, this mesh, whether it's the infrastructure that you're providing that a hospital is putting their records on, right? That a 90-year-old woman who doesn't even have a computer is still relying on. These same things can be pushed across borders instantly. And when we create safe and reliable means of protecting human rights, right, at the protocol level, at the system level, where rights can't be abrogated, simply because it was convenient or simply because someone asked. We create not just a better world, we create a freer world, and it can happen on every corner of the earth as fast as we can proliferate the technology. And I would argue not only that we can do this, not only that we should do this, but if the next generation is to enjoy the same rights that we ourselves inherited. Assert that the NSA would never collect communications on an American, any American, whether they're president or a congressman or whatever, without a warrant. They are lying. In the plain use of language, right? What collect means to you and me, right? That something travels across the phone line, that something travels across an internet line, they pick it up, they save it, and they drop it in their database. That happens to everyone right now. It does not matter whether you're the president, doesn't matter whether you're Congress, doesn't matter whether you're a judge, doesn't matter whether you're an accountant, a lawyer, doesn't matter whether it's you sitting in the room right now. These things happen by default. That's how, of course, the system of surveillance works, because when you pick up the phone, right, there's not a little flag associated with it that says, oh, this person's the president, this person's a congressman. You can manually go in and set up filters that say, don't collect on this number, that number, or whatever, but that's not really how it works. On the back end, there's a little bit of things like that, but what's happening is these intelligence agencies, these lawyers at the DOJ, for the president, they're saying something different. They're saying to them, collect doesn't mean that we copied your communications, that we put it in the bucket and that we saved it in case we want to look at it. To them, collect means that they take it out of the bucket and actually look at it and read it. Now, if you are an American citizen and they say, I want to look at your communications, I want to listen to this person's phone calls and everyone they contacted, this in theory is supposed to require a warrant. But the actual reality here is that they can do something different, and they do this without a warrant, which is there. That's what mass surveillance means. It means an indiscriminate dragnet collection of all the communications that are sort of washing back and forth throughout this global network every day, whether it's the cell phone network, whether it's the internet, whatever. But if you're in that bucket and you don't have a U.S. passport, you're not a U.S. citizen, no social security card, you don't have a green card, so you're not sort of legally privileged as a U.S. person, even if you're not technically a U.S. citizen, they can't, what they say, target you directly. But if they look at the other side of that communication, right, the communication that went overseas or involved a non-U.S. person in any way, that's entirely legal. That happens without a warrant. And they don't even have to be targeting a person, right? They don't have to be going, oh, I want to know who this person was talking to on the other side. In Pakistan, I want to pull all their phone calls. And, oh, in there, it happens to be Jeremy Scahill. Or, oh, I'm calling the Moscow escort service or whatever. And Donald Trump is their prime customer. So we get his phone calls from there. No. It doesn't require that. They can be targeting a machine. They can be targeting a server. They can be targeting a system. They can be targeting the desktop machine, anywhere in the world, a router, and all of those communications that it's passing, right, that include your communications, include my communications, that include people from Congress and the president, just the same. All of those are in there, and they get displayed in response to the query. Now, I did this professionally at Hawaii. This was my last position. I wasn't interested, of course, in targeting U.S. politicians or U.S. persons at all. My assigned target, right, were Chinese intrusion sets. This is what we call sort of hackers, viruses, malware that are known to be associated with a certain group, right? But because it's the internet, when I would look at these indicators of compromise, which is a sort of a technical term of art of saying some computer got hacked somewhere. Maybe it's at a defense contractor, right? Maybe it's in a university, maybe it's in a hospital, maybe it's at a congressman's office, right? And it's sending beacons that are meant for the hacker, they're intended for the hacker, going out across the internet to this server that I know. I say, I want to see everything that comes from that server. Now, when that comes back to me, right, it's not just things that go to the hacker, right? It can be everything that goes to that server, which includes legitimate transactions, because many times these servers are themselves hacked, right? We're talking about a hot point, because when somebody from China
or somebody from Russia, or somebody from the NSA hacks somebody else, they don't go directly from their origin to their target, because then it's very easy to trace back, right? Instead, they create a network of hops across the internet that are ordinary people's computers that don't have very good security practices, right? Your grandma. Your grandma's computer could very well be being used in actual offensive cyber operations by nation states. If when you go and you open sort of her internet browser, it's got all those ancient advertising bars and things like that.
Well, my grandma's computer contains some very offensive all caps emails.
Yeah, exactly. If they're forwarding chain letters and things like that, that's an indication that they're probably popped. But when we dial this back, right, what does this mean? If anybody at the NSA, if anybody at the FBI wanted to review communications about President Obama, right, like me sitting at the NSA, I could do that simply by typing in an IP address. That doesn't even have to be the president's IP address, right? Or if I want to search for his private email address or something like that, all I have to do is type it in the system, hit enter, and say, show me U.S. results for this. This is entirely legal, so long as I'm not targeting him officially, as I'm saying, I'm not interested in Obama, right? I'm interested in this known system that's affiliated with Chinese cyber espionage or whatever, that just happens to be Obama's BlackBerry.
Let me.
And
go ahead.
I'm not doing what they call reverse targeting, which is where I admit that I'm doing this, I'm targeting this system because I want to read Obama's emails, right? If I'm actually doing that, that happens all day long. People at NSA are doing that right now. This is legally prohibited. It's called reverse targeting, right? But when you hit certain stop points in your investigation, you're actually coached to do this kind of thing, where you say, we don't know that this is Obama's BlackBerry, right? This is an unknown internet-connected device that happens to have some connection to a known foreign intelligence target or a suspected foreign intelligence target. That doesn't have to be saying, Obama's involved in espionage. That could just be saying that that device has been connected by a Russian malicious software scam, right? And as long as we say we weren't intending to target him, he's not the target of our investigation, and we didn't know that it was Obama's BlackBerry, even if in reality we actually did, it's entirely legal.
So let's pretend for a moment that we should always take Donald Trump's statements seriously, and that we're dealing with like a normal, rational, sane person. If indeed there is some merit to his allegation that he made on Twitter that the Obama administration, well, he said Obama personally, but that the Obama administration was in some form or another targeting Trump or people around him, what would that look like?
So, this is where I don't want to speak too far beyond what is actually known. I don't want to get into the sort of craft of speculation here. Donald Trump has a well-established history of making unreliable statements. That's not in debate, right? That's not a point of contention. I think it is possible, based on everything we see and what we hear, there may be some indication that something like this happened on the back end, right? Where there's been some searches that implicate not Donald Trump directly, right? Because if he had that, he'd be up on the stage waving it around on TV. But some third-degree contact, something like that, may not even be directly connected to the campaign, because this is what the NSA does, right? This is what you pay them to do. Maybe one of these campaign officials actually had some contact with a Russian official, right? Or somebody who's a cutout, a go-between, right? But we have no evidence of that. It's publicly established, publicly known. And if Donald Trump or anybody else wants us to take this seriously, they have to show evidence. And the fact that they have not, despite the severity of this allegation, means that they're trying to make political hay, I suspect, out of something that affects all of us, right? Which is the fact that mass surveillance is making all of us vulnerable. Had Obama wanted to read Donald Trump's communications, the communications of anyone in his campaign, right? Or anybody at the NSA had to, right? You don't need the president's authority for this. Any analyst with the proper authorities at the NSA, with the right clearances, who works with X-Keyscore, right? That's the name of sort of our Google for spies that sorts through all of the things that you're typing into on the internet and sending over the wire, or the SMS messages that you're sending, or the phone calls you're making, could type in these numbers, type in these email addresses, and look at these things, right? That's the problem. It's not so much that this actually happened here, there, or the other, because we don't have evidence for that. If Donald Trump wants to take this seriously, right, he needs to fix the problem that everyone in America's communications are being collected right now without a warrant, and they're going into the bucket, and they're protected by very lax internal policy regulations, right? And this simply is not enough. If he's worried about the fact that somebody could have been wiretapping Trump Tower, that this could have happened without a warrant or even with a warrant, right? The problem is not, oh, you know, poor Donald Trump. You're the president, right? You should be asking questions about why was this possible in the first place, and why haven't I fixed it?
Right, and you know, it sounds to me like you're saying that Breitbart is not the best source of intelligence for the president of the United States. Am I correct in saying that? I mean, this is a guy who clearly, he apparently doesn't even, like, you know, want the full presidential daily briefing, but he damn sure makes sure to see Fox and Friends every fucking morning, which on its own level is kind of frightening. But I wanted to ask you about this conversation about what's being called, you know, the deep state. And I don't know how much, you know, American television news you consume in Russia, but MSNBC has basically transformed into a Cold War, you know, opponent of the Soviet Union, and they have like retired intelligence person after general after admiral on the air making totally unfounded claims about what has been proven, and the people who are sort of saying, hey, let's see the evidence, like me or Glenn Greenwald, others, we're called Russian agents. And you, of course, have long been tarred with the allegation that you somehow are in cahoots with the FSB, or that you brought all these documents over to Russia, and you now have been flipped into a Russian agent. Talk about, given that you've lived through this yourself, talk about your assessment, or give your assessment of the relationship between Russia and the United States, Trump and Russia, and the way that all of this is being covered in the news media.
I'll talk about this generally in the context of my case, right?
Are you an FSB agent?
Crazy allegations. I'm sorry?
Are you an FSB agent?
No, I'm not. But, you know, maybe that's a retirement plan. No, seriously, though, that's exactly the problem, is we've got these people who make allegations, right, about things that actually are relevant, things that actually should be investigated, but they're not interested in the actual phase of investigation. I don't want people to trust me. I want you to doubt me, right? I'm a former NSA guy, former CIA guy. I ended up in Russia through no fault of my own, right? I was actually trying to transit to Latin America. And the U.S. government revoked my passport to trap me in Russia, which is a fairly amazing thing that people don't really understand that well. And yeah, there were all these allegations some years ago where they went, look, this just doesn't look right, right? So maybe we can paint him with the Russian spy brush, because that's something that doesn't go away. We've been seeing movies about Russian spies for, like, you know, since since we were making movies. And there are Russian spies, right? That's the thing. You don't just brush this off as nothing. What you do is you look into it. What you do is you investigate it, right? And Congress did this to me. The intelligence community did this to me. The CIA, the NSA, all these guys, right? They saw me as public enemy number one because I showed evidence that they were breaking the law. The federal courts ruled they were breaking the law, right? This isn't an allegation. This is fact. They violated the rights of every man, woman, and child in the United States. Further than that, they violated the basic human rights of everyone in the world. The United Nations affirmed that. But so here's the thing. All that investigation went into me, right? Congress just released a report some months ago, which was criticized by every journalist who studied the issue, where the worst thing that they could show that I did, and this is with complete access to classified information, Congress being able to sit down with the director of the CIA and say, what's actually happening with this guy, is the worst thing that I ever did, was that I lied to my boss about a sick day. I said, hey guys, I'm going to the hospital when in reality, I was going to meet with journalists to tell them that the CIA and the NSA and all these groups were breaking the law, right? So the allegations fall apart if they're not true after investigation. And this gets back to a basic, fundamental point of logic, of rationality, that is supposed to be the foundation of sort of our national character, which is that which can be presented without evidence must be dismissed without consideration, right? What we are supposed to be doing is calling for investigation, going, the allegations about Donald Trump are cause for concern. We can't take them seriously because there's no evidence backing them that we see publicly, right? But by all means, do we want the FBI to look into this? Yes, absolutely. Do we want the CIA to be investigating this? Yes, absolutely. And when we have evidence, we need to present it because that's how a system of law is supposed to work. People in the United States, this is supposed to be a free country. We used to say that. We don't say that so much anymore. But if this is a free country, right, where people have the presumption of innocence, right, they're innocent until proven guilty, by God, why are we saying the worst things about people imaginable without actually showing evidence of that? Now, there is plenty of circumstantial evidence at this point implicating that Donald Trump's campaigns, the people around him, have causes for concern, right? So we should be digging into that. But passing this off as established fact is a real problem because it's reducing our standards for evidence about things that actually happen. Saying I'm a Russian spy, right? When even the former deputy director of the NSA doesn't say that is a problem. The guy who was in charge of my investigation, right? For people who are like, Edward Snowden is a Russian spy. Let's go to the former deputy director of the National Security Agency, Chris Inglis, who is the guy who actually investigated me, and see what he thinks.
What is the formal belief of why Snowden did what he did? Was he acting as an agent of a foreign government, or was he self-recruited to just do what he did for whatever reason?
First, I have to point out that I don't represent the United States government anymore. I'm no longer in an official capacity, and so I wouldn't know what the official position of the U.S. government is any more than I would know the absolute truth of what Snowden's thinking was and all the machinations that he went through to do what he did. But here's what I surmise based upon a careful observation of the facts available to me. It does seem clear that his intention was to go to Latin or South America after he revealed all this material in Hancock. He worked very hard, and his lawyers worked very hard on his behalf to actually achieve that in the days and weeks afterwards. Doesn't seem to me that a destination of China or Russia would be preferred. This was something that was done on the fly. It wasn't carefully thought through. I can't imagine that his plan A was to arrive in Moscow and essentially be in virtual isolation in a foreign country. It probably is a nice enough place to be, but it's not home. So I don't think that he was in the employ of the Chinese or the Russians. I don't see any evidence that would indicate that. And even if they're careful in terms of practicing denial and deception, I think there would be certain telltales in there that would work out more crisply, more cleanly, separate and apart from where he's wound up.
Okay, well, clearly he's a Russian agent, so let's just dismiss everything he just said. The relevance of that, though, I mean, just to put it in context for people, I mean, this was a former very senior official at the NSA.
The number two at the NSA.
The number two at the NSA, who he doesn't say it directly, but he's referencing what you mentioned before, which is that you didn't choose Russia. The Obama administration chose Russia by canceling your passport and at one point forcing Evo Morales, the president of Bolivia, forcing his plane to make an unplanned landing, a forced landing, because they suspected you might have been on board this aircraft. I think that's one of the greatest lies that's been told about your case, is this idea that you chose to go to Russia, that you intended to make a deal with Moscow, and it sticks. You hear it constantly. Edward Snowden is a Russian spy. He now has become an asset of the Russian government.
Well, the funny thing is you don't actually hear this from serious people anymore. You hear this from sort of the crazy hyper-partisans. I have sort of formal affiliations with like U.S. universities. I'm invited to speak at them regularly. Nobody has any legal trouble. Nobody gets, there's no harassment or concern about this. Because serious people who actually look at this, they see that this is well-established fact, right?
Wait, you're saying that that guy who got caught sending dick pics, who was an NSA guy, that he's not a serious person?
I'm not going to speak about any individual.
Okay, sorry.
In particular.
I don't mean to force you to
look,
respond to someone's dick pics. I'm sorry.
The only people who are making these kind of allegations today are either sort of, and I say this with sympathy and compassion rather than criticism, people who are seriously struggling with issues like senility, or people whose judgment is otherwise fairly well established as compromised, right? When you have, for example, Jeffrey Stone, who was part of the Obama Commission to investigate what the NSA was doing, inviting me to debates, right, about the lawfulness of these programs, and they're not saying like you're a Russian spy or anything like that. The reason I'm even on the stage with these people is because they have affirmed that that's not the case, right? If the number 2 of the NSA is like, look, there's nothing to see here. The number of times that I agree with the top leadership at the NSA in today's world are very few. So if we're speaking from the same page, there's probably a reason for it.
Let me ask you about the deep state issue. There seems to be an emerging consensus among influential liberal pundits and political figures, politicians in the Democratic Party, that there's this awesome group of heroic NSA, CIA, military people that are protecting the Republic from Donald Trump. What do you make of that narrative? That there's the deep state is A, trying to undermine Donald Trump, and B, is really in secret protecting all of us from the dangers of his administration?
Well, it's half true. And I mean, I don't like to say these things are right and wrong because it's not black and white. There is a deep state, right? What are we saying when we talk about deep state? We're talking about the people who survive presidents, right? These are not political appointees who come and go in this office or that office. They're the people who are senior enough to influence policy, to shape the government's understanding of an issue. And all the little people under them who are just sort of the worker bees who actually do things. These worker bees, by and large, are good people, right? I worked at NSA, at CIA for a long time. I strongly disagree with a lot of their policies, right? They cause harm. They violate rights. They make us, the United States, less safe as a nation. And they destabilize peace, not just here at home, but around the world, right? That's not to say everything they do is bad, right? These worker bees, right? They're good people who do bad things for what they consider to be good reasons, right? There are literally people in the United States who ran torture programs, and there are people who actually did the torture. I'm not saying these are good people, right? These are war crimes, uncontroversially. And these people probably did know at the time. But why did they do it, right? They did it because they were told there would be blood on their hands or everybody else's hands, or people were going to die or buildings were going to collapse if it wasn't done. Now, I'm not saying that was the right thing to do. But who are the people who bear the most responsibility for this, right? That's where you find the deep state. It's not the guy at the desk. The guy at the desk doesn't even pick what he's going to do that day. He's ordered to do this, that, or the other. Follow the chain up, right? When you go to the White House, when you go one level down to the political appointees, and then you go that one step down, right? Political appointees who survive beyond presidents, and the people who sort of convert, they roll over from being a political appointee to embed themselves in the government on a permanent basis. That's where you see the deep state. And these are the people who are writing the memos that become our laws. These are the people who create the findings and suggestions that say, you know what, torture would work. Torture would save lives, even though, in fact, it didn't. And it actually gave Al-Qaeda and ISIS their greatest propaganda boost that we've ever provided them. Because they can say, look, the United States is no better than us. Yes, we chop heads off. Yes, we drill holes in hands. But you know what? They do, too. Now, of course, we aren't actually beheading people, but we are dousing people in cold water and letting them freeze to death in a cell after we've beaten them all day long. We had people who had, hummus in their food actually anally inserted. These people were raped with their dinner as a punishment for non-compliance or non-cooperation. We can say many things. We can talk about moments of passion. We can talk about the loss of rationality in moments of panic. But these are fundamentally un-American things. And if there's one thing, right, one thing we need to remember, It's that these people have never faced the inside of a courtroom in a criminal trial. George Bush, right, who was sort of the architect of all of these programs and authorities, he's the one who actually gave all these deep staters the legitimacy to construct and carry these things out. This could not have happened without his support. Is now being rehabilitated in the public eye now. They're saying, oh, he's this wonderful, happy little painter guy. He's like Bob Ross with an accent. No, he's not. He's a war criminal.
He's painting his own world, man. He's just, pretty little clouds. He can make it whatever he wants. No, it's disgusting that, well, first of all, you have the kind of, True Detective season 3 with Bush and Michelle Obama, getting all cuddly and hugging. This was a guy who was responsible for wars that killed upwards of 1 million people, including thousands of U.S. soldiers. And he now is being presented as like, he's the reasonable Republican because Trump is so, unfathomably dangerous. And I think it's a disgrace to the soldiers who died, but also the civilians whose lives were treated as like just dirt to step on around the world. And it really is a sick part of the amnesia that's drilled into our culture of history, of the context of how we actually ended up where we are. I want to close by asking a couple questions about the recent CIA releases from WikiLeaks. Just to put it in context for people, the Vault 7 releases it's about 8,700 or so documents or files that deal with the CIA's hacking capabilities. And one of the things that's gotten a lot of attention is the idea that, or the platform that allows a particular Samsung TV to be turned into a kind of in-home surveillance device. And, a lot of people now are becoming aware of what's called the Internet of Things. You've got your refrigerator is hooked up to the Internet. You've got that damn Alexis or Siri or, Go Google or whatever it's called. I know you very early when this came out said that this was extraordinarily significant. What to you, given your expertise and your background, what are the biggest takeaways from what has been released so far, and what do you think is important for people to understand about what's contained in these CIA documents?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to talk about here. The thing that I don't like, that I'm not so impressed by, is everybody's talking about, Samsung TVs. Nobody really cares about these Samsung TVs in terms of what this means for our future. Any device that's connected to the Internet can be hacked, right? And this Samsung TV, in this circumstance, is not hacked through the Internet. This is a USB-enabled hack, right, where somebody has to, this is an old version of TV, by the way. They had to go in and actually stick a USB drive in it, start the TV up, and that would hack the TV. Then you pull the USB drive out, and the TV starts listening in on you. And people go, oh, well, the CIA is not going to be breaking into my house, right? And that's actually true. That's me. Don't panic. But they don't go into your house, right? What they do is they wait for when these devices are being shipped to you, when you order them on Amazon or whatever. They go to them at the airports. They get the box. They use a little hair dryer to soften the adhesive. They open up the box. Then they put the USB stick in it. They seal the box back all nice and perfect. And then they ship it on to you. And now your router, your computer, your TV is hacked. This is a very routine thing that happens, right?
Wait, so you're saying that
the CIA that's doing the hands-on on this, by the way. That's the FBI.
Just to clarify, so and I know that there are documents that were made public because of you, that showed that they're intercepting routers and other devices in bulk, right? And like, for instance, some of the exports from the United States that deal with internet technology and are going overseas, they'll actually contaminate those devices without necessarily knowing what specific person's going to get them. They're contaminating them at the source before they're shipped.
Sort of.
Okay.
It's not
yes,
that
it's a question, not a statement.
En masse, indiscriminately for everything, right? It's not like every iPhone that gets sent to China is backdoored. If they know there's a particular zip code or a particular region that has like a nuclear facility in it, they'll do this kind of thing. And that would be appropriate in many cases. You would want them to do that. But this is a method, right, that they apply to many different things, where they'll also do this to political parties, right? They might also do this to a newsroom if they see that a device is going to a particular building or whatever. These are the kind of causes for concern. scope out from the individual thing of how does this affect me? Think about how does this affect society, right? And this is what the real value of this CIA release is about. The most important thing here is that we now have concrete evidence that the CIA, the NSA, the United States government writ large, and our partners in places like the United Kingdom are supporting a commercial market in making every internet-connected device less secure. They are paying companies to develop what are basically digital weapons or tools, like burglary tools, that will break into any device, right? And then when they create these things, the problem is anybody can use them, right? You don't just have to have the tool if you can rediscover the same kind of thing, which studies just came out in the last week showing the frequency of this, by the way, for any given tool is 5 to 20% per year, right? 5% if you believe sort of a not very reliable RAND study from a closed data set. No academics are allowed to look at it. No universities are allowed to look at it. They just say, trust us. These numbers say what they think they are. They say there's a 5% chance every year that when the government uses a new kind of wiretap capability, the Russians, the Chinese, random hackers, whoever will rediscover it and can use it to listen to American iPhones, right? Or Samsung TVs in the United States, whatever the device of the day happens to be. Or 20% every year. That's insane, right? This doesn't happen in any other industry. If every time you bought a hamburger, there was a 5% chance that would kill you, people wouldn't be eating hamburgers anymore until they change the law. This is the dynamic that we really see in this release, and that's the thing that people are focusing the least on outside of policy circles, because it's not very exciting, it's not very accessible, it's not very easy to understand. But this largely misses, I think, the top level point when we think about all of this stuff. And this dynamic of Donald Trump, the fact that the world is on fire, the fact that the president's statements can't be relied upon, the fact that his laws are violating our Constitution in such a blatant and open manner, right, is that this is actually not new. What's different is he is so inept that we see it, right? Even his representatives go on the news, and they don't try to lie carefully. They don't try to lie in a manner that has a kind of art to it. They do so openly, without shame, because they say, what are you going to do to stop us? But this happened in the Bush administration. He created a warrantless wiretapping program that, on its face, violated the Fourth Amendment so badly, so boldly, that the Attorney General of the United States at one point refused to sign it because he didn't think he could defend that if he was eventually brought into the docket one day. What did the president do? Well, he didn't go, all right, well, the Attorney General says this isn't legal, we shouldn't do it. He turned to the NSA director and said, well, the Attorney General won't sign off on this. Will you do this anyway? And the director of the National Security Agency said, well, the president's asking me. Sure. Even though he knew that was a violation of the Constitution. Let's go to President Barack Obama, right? This is a similar thing. Obama was a fairly progressive, fairly liberal politician by American standards. And I don't mean on the American political spectrum, because he was actually pretty far right as far as what people would consider to be a liberal. He was the one who said, the world is a global battlefield. I'm going to assassinate U.S. citizens without a trial outside of an actual combat zone because I believe they're a threat to the United States. Now, right or wrong, whether you think he was justified or unjustified in that, that's unprecedented, and that's clearly a violation of due process, right? But this happened. When you look at the statements of journalists who worked under the Obama administration, we're talking mainstream people, right? They're describing his activities against the press as a war on whistleblowers, a war against the press. Whenever something comes to the public eye, cyber operations that are questionable, things that failed, he starts trying to put people in jail. The editor of the New York Times, right, this is not what we would consider sort of a radical fringe source, said the Obama White House was the most secret they've ever dealt with. James Risen, who the DOJ for some time threatened with jail if he wouldn't reveal who his source was, said Obama was the greatest enemy of press freedom in a generation. Now, what does this all boil down to? Why does this matter? The reality is all governments lie. all governments break the law. And most frequently, this happens without us realizing it. The majority of us, right? People who follow this, people who study this will see it. They'll complain, they'll protest, but they don't have critical mass because they don't have control of the airwaves. They're sort of shuttled off in the corner of the room where they talk amongst each other. But the average person doesn't care that much because these presidencies, these administrations, give them the space to deny it to themselves, right? To say, I can go on with my day, I can go on with my life, and I don't have to confront these issues. I can live in my comfortable life. I can go home after a hard day, right? I've got people to take care of. I've got bills to pay. I have obligations. I don't have time to save the government, right? We can't do that anymore. That is no longer a luxury. And that, more than anything else, may be the silver lining of this disastrous administration, is the fact that people are, for the first time in a generation, realizing that democracy is not an inheritance. Folks, this is a challenge. This is our challenge. This is something that requires effort. This is something that requires sacrifice. And this is something that if you turn your back on, will not get better. It will get worse. It is not enough to believe in something. It is not enough to think that America is the land of the free, the home of the brave. We have constitutional values and these things will simply work out. They will mean nothing